So, I want to show you how I make my bread, sourdough bread. Like I do it, I don't use recipes. I just eyeball it more or less. I weigh some things, you will see later. I start with feeding the sourdough that comes from the fridge. I just filmed it, but my SD card decided to go bad, so I lost the footage. I usually have it in this. It doesn't matter where you keep it. It can be a jar, a simple jar. So I had it for maybe a week in the fridge, and I took it out now, and it was let's say a big spoon of it. You can have more or less, doesn't matter that much. And then I mixed it here with some lukewarm water, and I have whole grain flour. In my case, you can use white flour, it's okay. My flour is emmer, which is an ancient grain, but you can use whole wheat or spelt or whatever you want. You can also use white flour, it doesn't matter. The important thing when you feed it, to keep it in the fridge again, use always the same flour. It gets used to it and it gets more robust. But other than that, you can, right now I could have fed it with white wheat, for example, like the flour that you will use for the bread. Okay, so I mixed it, and this is the consistency. In my case, you can make it more fluid or thicker, that's up to you. When I put it in the fridge for keeping it for a week or two, I usually make it thicker than this, like a small dough, so that it keeps longer in the fridge. Maybe sometimes I don't want to bake for 2 weeks, and then it keeps longer in the fridge like that. Okay, so I will cover this. I use this lid in today video, and it has a little flap here, so air can get in and out. I will just leave it like this. If you don't have this and you want to use such a recipient, you can just open two flops so it has some breathing space on the sides. If you want to just use a bowl, for example, you can use something like this, which is a silicone lid, which is reusable, or you can use plastic wrap. I avoid plastic wrap when I can. If not, even a damp towel on top, and that's fine. So it's around 10 o'clock in the morning. I will come back probably in the evening and see how it has risen. And I will prepare the dough, and probably I will keep the dough in the fridge. I will not bake it today. But you can also bake it in the same day. I just like to have it fresh baked, and it has time to cool down, so I can put it in the fridge. I will explain that later. Okay, so we'll leave this stay, and then we'll come back probably in the evening or a bit earlier, depends on the heat that we'll have today. So see you later. Okay, so we're back. It's 20 past 3 in the afternoon. So it was hot, so the sourdough rose quite a bit. Whoops. So I'm gonna mix the ingredients for the bread, and this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use my scale and the bowl. Whoops, let's see, what did I do? Right, I'm gonna tear it out, it takes some time. All right, so I'm gonna use all-purpose flour, which here in Germany it would be the type 550, and I ground some whole spelt flour, around 100 grams. Okay, so I'm gonna add the flours, and I like to make 700 grams of flours bread usually, but it might vary. Maybe I make it 600, sometimes bigger, depends what I feel like. You can make it half a kilo. It doesn't really matter, it depends on where you're baking it. I like to have it a bit bigger because we freeze part of it, so I bake less often. Okay, so I have 100 grams of spelt, and now I'm gonna add, so that I make around 700 grams. Okay, a bit more. Almost. Okay, more or less 700. And usually you should add 2% salt, which would be, for 700 grams, would be 14 grams of salt. But I like to make it a bit more salty, so I'm gonna add about 18 grams, I think. But that depends on your taste. Be aware that table salt is more salty than unrefined salt, so make your judgment about that. Right, so I'm gonna take note of these things. I usually don't take note, but so that you have an idea. So I have 700 grams of flour, which is a mixture in my case now. And let's see how much sourdough, no, sorry. First, I'm gonna mix a bit these flours with salt, just so that it distributes a bit better. Okay. I'm using this whisk, which is called a Danish whisk, I think, but you don't really need it. You can use a wooden spoon or a fork or whatever you wish. It's not, or your hands directly. Okay, and now for reference, as I said, I usually don't measure, but as for reference, we can measure how much of the sourdough I have. So I just add it here. Okay, and I'm just gonna leave a little bit, hope you see. This will be for, it doesn't focus, wait. This will be for my feeding for the sourdough that I keep. So I just leave a little bit of the sourdough in the bowl, and this will be used for feeding it and then putting it in the fridge. I'll show you later how I do this. Right, and now we have to add water. This is 145 grams of the sourdough, which was previously fed. Okay, I'm gonna remove this from the scale, and let's measure the water so that I can rest afterwards, so we know how much I used. I usually eyeball it, but just for the sake of the video, that's how I usually do the recipes. I measure the ingredients before and after, so I know how much I used, but I don't stick to recipes usually. Right, so water, I will write down the amount I had, and afterwards I will scale it again. Good. So let's start mixing. I usually have the sourdough in the middle, the starter. I add a bit of water. This is room temperature. I have 26 degrees Celsius here, so it's not very warm, just summer temperature. And I start mixing in the middle, as you see, just adding a bit more. I usually don't want to add too much water at once. I can see how much the flour needs. Some flours are wetter or drier, depends on your environment. And so that's why a recipe is not always foolproof. It's better to look with your eyes and to touch it. And okay, it needs more. I'm trying to incorporate all the water just until there's no more flour, but I give it some time. Okay. As I said, all the grains are different. They absorb water in a different way. Also, the environment that you're living in might be drier or wetter, so it really depends. Okay, so it's starting to incorporate, but you can see it's still quite dry. So I go little by little. If you make it too wet, it might be a bit difficult to work with. And especially if you don't develop the gluten network too much, you might end up with a UFO, as I call them, which is some sort of a flat bread. It happened to me last week. I added too much water. So you have to pay attention. So as you can see, it's kind of incorporated now. It's a bit shaggy, but it will turn out better after. Okay, looks good. Okay, so I will leave it like this. I will clean this one, the whisk. It could be even a little drier. Let's see how it evolves. I might have overdid it with the water. If you're a beginner, go drier. It's easier to work with it. You can even add now some flour if you think that it might be too wet. But I'm gonna risk it. I'm gonna have it like this. I'm gonna cover it. You can cover it with a damp towel. I have a silicone lid for this, and I'm gonna be back afterwards to stretch and fold. I will show you. And now I'm gonna weigh the water and see how much I have left. Let's see. Okay, now it's on 0, more or less. Okay. Right, I have to subtract, and I will also feed the sourdough for keeping it afterwards for future uses. Okay, so I have very little sourdough here, but it is enough. I will add a bit of water. Again, I just eyeball it, as you can see. Okay, I dissolve this a bit. And I'm gonna add my emmer flour. As I told you before, that's what I feed it with. Whole emmer flour. And I'm gonna make it a bit stiffer than what I had for the bread. This will keep better in the fridge. Okay, it looks like a dough. You can make it even stiffer than this. Okay. And And I'm gonna transfer it to the recipient that I usually use, which is this one. You can put it also in a jar and close it. This one is not sealed or something, so if you use a jar with a screw-on lid, just leave it a bit loose. And I'm gonna keep this on the counter for 1 hour or 2 until I see that it has some activity, and then I put it in the fridge. And I'll be back for the folding. So I'm back after 20 minutes, half an hour, something like this. And as I promised, the amount of water I used was 522 grams, which is 74% hydration. You could probably go lower also if you want to have an easier to work with dough. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna wet one of my hands and just try to fold it. I'm gonna stretch a bit and just fold it like this. It already has a better structure. I will wet a bit more my hand and try to make sort of a ball or something. I don't know. You will see that it cannot be stretched anymore. Right, that's it. No big deal. Still sticky, but it will change. I will cover it again and wait another 20 minutes, 30 minutes. If you do more folds, then you will have a better gluten structure. You can also mix it with a dough mixer and it will have a quicker result of making the gluten structure. But if you don't have a mixer or you just want to make it effortless, you just come from time to time and fold it. Okay, see you in another half an hour or so. So we are back. Might be more than half an hour, I don't remember. But let's do some stretching. This time we will do it differently. So I'm gonna wet both of my hands and we will gather the dough from the sides and pull up and try to tuck in underneath. Same on this other side. It starts to look really nice, and now 90 degrees. And on the other side, I hope you can see it. So only the first one I usually do now as stretch and fold, and these other ones are just tucking under. See, it looks more like a dough now. And I think I'm gonna put it in the fridge and continue tomorrow morning. We'll see how much it has risen. If you don't want to refrigerate it, you can bake it the same day. You just leave it until it puffs up a bit more. But you can also do these foldings that are more gentle a few more times, and then you create more tension into the dough, so the gluten network is stronger. It will rise better. So I'm going to cover it and put it in the fridge, and also my sourdough that I fed, I'm going to put it also into the fridge, and we'll see each other tomorrow. Good morning everyone, it's next day. I took this bowl out of the fridge and you can see it puffed up, has some bubbles. And now we're gonna flour a Benetton. If you don't have a Benetton, you can use a bowl or a strainer and just lay a tea towel inside and then flour it. And for flour, You can use plain flour, or I like to use sometimes rice flour because it keeps whiter, so it doesn't burn so much, and also it doesn't stick to wherever you put it. The Benetton, you can also use it without this layover, cotton layover, so you will have the lines on the bread afterwards, but it might stick more, so experiment. You always have to experiment and see what you like more. Okay, so let's flour this generously. Okay, put it aside. I will flour this slightly, not too much, the surface. If your dough was in the fridge and it did not puff up too much, you can just take it out and leave it for an hour or two at room temperature, but mine it's quite has risen, so I don't want to overproof it. And I'm gonna try to take it out with this spatula, hopefully not removing too much air. Let's see how it goes. Okay, not bad. And I will try to shape it now, just folding it a bit, stretching lightly. Such a spatula is really helpful in this case. And I will try to pinch it to create some tension. Okay, and now I take the flour out of my way and I flip it so that the bottom it's down but doesn't have too much flour underneath, and I'm gonna try to roll it a bit, like sort of 90 degrees, so that it drags on the surface, just to create the tension here. And be careful not to overdo it because it will start to rip. Because it's cold, it's quite easy to work with, it's tougher, so that would be also an option if you feel for you it's difficult to work with the dough. Okay, so I have a nice round, and I will flip it inside the Benetton, but with the nice side down, so that when we get it into the oven I can flip it again and the nice side would be up. Okay, so I gently put it here and try to close something if it's opened, and the rest of the flour goes here, and I will need some more so that it doesn't stick to my tea towel that I will put on top. Okay, now a tea towel on top. You can moist it, but I will leave it like this. It doesn't take too much to rise, I think. And I have to come back when it's risen. I'll show you how I look if it has risen enough. In the meantime, we can prepare the cast iron. I use a cast iron pot, and this is mine. It might be bigger than other ones. That's why I make my breads with 700 grams of flour. If you have a smaller one, make a smaller bread or make two out of the same dough. You can split it at this point and then make two. And you can also split it the day before and put it in 2 bannetons or 2 bowls and put it in the fridge already formed, and then the next day you can just flip it inside the cast iron cold. That's also an option. I use baking paper, and I usually reuse it until it's very brown. So I will take this out and just heat the cast iron like this at 250 degrees Celsius. The importance of the cast iron is that the steam gets trapped inside when I put the bread, so that the bread can rise nicely. And then after half an hour I take the lid off and the steam will escape, so the bread has time to roast the outer layer, so it gets crunchy. If you don't like the crunchy outer layer, you can leave the lid a bit longer. Right, so I'll put this to heat up and wait for the bread to rise a bit, and I'll see you back. So it may be 1 hour later and our dough is done, prepared to go in the oven. So it puffed up a bit, and when you make an indent, it comes back slowly. If it comes too quick, then you have to leave it more, and if it doesn't come, it's a bit overproof. I think this is a bit at the limit. It comes back slowly. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is take out the really hot cast iron pot and use gloves for it, because it's really hot and we have to be careful about it. And then I'm gonna flip this onto my parchment paper, score it with a razor, and also be very careful with a razor. You can also use a very sharp knife, but I don't have such sharp knives as a razor. I like to use the razor. And then flip it into the pot. Okay, so I'm gonna do this and concentrate. You have to concentrate because the pot is very hot and you want to do this operation quite quickly. Okay, so this is really hot. Let me think. I'm gonna put it like this, and I will leave it like that so it doesn't lose heat. And I'm gonna do this flipping quickly and carefully. All right. I'm gonna spread a bit the flour. Let me see if you can see. This is gonna fall. Okay, so you can, for example, just do a cross, or if you want to make some superficial cuts, they will turn interesting. It's like a pattern. So wherever you cut, the dough will open, and we usually need these cuts so that we control where it opens. If you don't do this, oh, I have to be careful not to to burn myself. If you don't cut it, it will open maybe somewhere on the sides randomly. So quickly do really deep cuts in the middle. These are functional, the other ones are aesthetically pleasing. I will get the lid off with the help of the sides of the paper. Put it inside the pot. Right. Put the lid back on and off into the oven, still at 250. You can reduce it to 220 if your oven is a bit too hot. Mine it's not. And before I go, I remembered that I didn't tell you that if your sourdough starter it's not very strong, I recommend you use a pinch of normal yeast, baker's yeast. So you have the flavor of the sourdough, but then you have the rise that the yeast, the baker's yeast, will give you. So keep that in mind. Even if you don't have a very mature sourdough starter and you just started with it, you can still use it and use a bit of yeast, additional yeast, just to boost the behavior of the dough rising. Okay, we'll be back in half an hour when I take off the lid from the pot. So after 30 minutes I took the lid off, and now after another 15 minutes I'm gonna take it out and take a look how it looks like. I'm gonna take it out completely. And see if it looks done. I think it still needs some browning here, so I'm gonna put it back inside and leave it without the pot. Maybe 10-15 minutes, depends on how brown you want it. You always have to check if it sounds hollow. So it sounds hollow, but I want it a bit more roasted. So I'll put it back in the oven on the grill. And that's it. Okay, let's take a look. I think it's browned beautifully. See, it's all brown now. And I'm gonna leave it here to cool down, maybe 2 hours or something like this. It's important to let it cool down because it's still baking inside. So if you cut right now, you will have this gooey mess where you cut it. So I will leave it cool down, and then when it cools down, I'm gonna come and cut it. It's not gonna be a very airy one because I didn't fold it so many times. I didn't expand the gluten network, but it looks nice. I'm happy with it. And I just want to show you how it sounds when it's cooling down. Many few hours later, it is chilled, so we can cut the bread. I like to use a serrated knife. I think it's easier to cut bread with it. And usually I cut it in 4, and I leave one of the quarters in a bag, in a Ziploc bag, to be eaten, and the other ones I freeze them for later use. And this way you keep the bread fresh for more time. So let's cut into it. Ta-da! It's a dense bread, also because I used some whole grain flour, and also because the gluten is not very developed. We will try another recipe using a dough kneading machine and see the difference. But we like the bread like this in our home because we use it to spread stuff on top and stuff like that. Yep, that's it.